Okay, so right now today I've got this scene from JRZ. It's a little, I don't know if I'm allowed to say the name out right, because, you know. But in this one, what we're going to do is we're going to cover how to use the new grid support system from Lychee in the 6.0. And so, but first with the scene, all I did is I just loaded in all the models as they were, and I spread them out a little bit off camera, just because I don't think everyone wants to watch that. But I am going to show a little bit of, you know, going to some orientation and preparing them for the print. And then we'll get right into how to use the new grid support system. So with that, yeah, so first thing, let's just start with this little guy. And with orientation, I think I've went over this before in another video, but it's good to just kind of keep hitting it, is what I really want to look for is Y or V shapes. And so if I look at him from this end, what I have here is kind of a Y shape with his arms. But if I look at it from the side, you know, it's pretty good. But the problem here is at this bottom corner right here. If I support it like this one, I think this bottom corner might flatten out a little bit. And on the final model, this will be pretty obvious because the way it connects up with the feet. And so right here on the feet, it's a flat. It's kind of a flat base right here. And so if this flattens out, you'll kind of have an opening there right at the belly. So we don't really want it to be too sharp of an angle here on the side. So on that one, you know, we can maybe reduce it by a little bit. But here's, you know, if you went like this, it would be probably the best. But here's something interesting to kind of keep in mind. And I'm going to go over kind of a few features here in Lychee. If I come over here and I turn on the layer thickness preview, I don't think this is a tool that very many use, but it's a great tool because if I come in here, I can actually see what's going to happen with these top layers and how you might have some issues with some layer lines on the face of this model. And so one thing we also want to try to do with orientation is make sure that we're not going to have some really massive layer lines. And this is at 30 UM. If I decreased it to 50 UM, and we can do that real quick, just come in here and set this to 50 for the layer height, and go back to it. We're going to have even bigger layer lines right here. And so there's also that to consider. You know, this nose would be pretty interesting looking, and so would the chin. And so with the rotation of this model, you know, maybe we do want to bring it up just a little bit more to try to bring some of those last layer lines maybe into a place that's less noticeable. We can even go up a little bit more. You're never going to get rid of them completely, but now they're less on the face, kind of more on the nose, that's okay, on the tip there, that's okay, and the eye, but mostly they're up here on the top. The other thing you could probably do is like rotate at 45 off of the XY, because the layer lines are going to occur not just on the Z as it builds up, but they're going to also occur on the XY as well, because you've got square pixels on all three dimensions. And so rotating it like that one, we can see the layers are going to be a little bit different than they were at a direct 90 degrees. And you can kind of preview that one and find out what's the best way to print this guy. So with that, I think that's probably about the best way to do it. With the rest of them, they're much easier. The legs, I guess that's a little bit difficult because this one we can do it either like this. And the advantage of doing it this way is that all the support damage won't be on the top where we'll notice it. Let me turn off the layer preview. They won't be here where we'll notice it. All the supports will be on the bottom, but it's a little bit harder to support this way just because of the pants. If I turned it around, it's much easier to support because most of these are going to print right off themselves, and I only need supports at the bottom. But again, the support damage is going to be on the top of all these. So if I go here, you'll see all the places with yellow, I have to place supports, and that's going to be very visible on the final product because that's facing up towards you. So I think for this one, though it's a little bit more difficult, I do think this is the better pattern to start supporting this off of. One thing I like to do is just look at it from underneath and turn on the orthographic view. And that way I can try to balance, you know, try to find the least amount of yellow that I have to place supports on. But I also want to make sure I've got access to all these overhangs that are easy. So I may end up doing something kind of like that where I can reach them all. And there's not as much, there's not as much yellow. This right here is all going to be hidden, so it doesn't really matter that much. The next thing, and this I kind of did beforehand as a little pro tip to show you guys. I think it's pretty cool. It's not something that I've seen too many people do, but just to let you know it's here. So right here I took the chest and the pants and I put them together about where they should be. If I move the layer slider, you kind of see the keys lined up where it should be. But one thing I did do is I actually pushed this down inside the pants just a little bit. And if I rotate it, if I grab them both and rotate them, and then use the layer slider again, you should be able to kind of see about how much I pushed them into each other. It's kind of hard to see, but if I just like this, it's kind of hard to see, but it pushes in there maybe 0.5 millimeter into the body. Now what I can do with this, if I can select, if I go over to the hollowing and select this top part right here, I don't want to place a hole in it. What I want to do is I actually want to convert this into the object as a whole. So if I do this, what this will do is basically where this intersects this won't be 3D printed. And so there'll actually be a little bit of a gap that this one can slide into, covering up that damage that I think is going to occur on the stomach, just because it's a sharp angle right here. And sharp angles never really form correctly if they're facing down towards the build plate. So that's one way to like kind of hide that a little bit. Just as we print this one, it's going to leave you that little gap. And so now what I can do is I don't really need this. I can just delete it or move it off the build plate and hit V on my keyboard to hide it. Or you can click these little eyes over here to hide them for anything you don't want on the build plate. And now if I select both of these, let's do that. I can rotate it to the position that I want it to be in to support it. And then now I'm ready to start supporting this, and I'll have just a slightly better model that'll go together a little quicker. It's a little extra thing, don't have to do that, but just something kind of fun. Everything else is gonna be pretty simple. We're just gonna quickly rotate them up like this, especially with something like a sword. We don't want to put any supports on that blade, because the blade is a really high focus point when you look at this model. So we really want to make sure that the blade is doesn't really need anything. Feet are really easy. Don't have to think about too much on those ones, just because, especially since the whole bottom of the foot is going to be hidden. We just want to make sure this lip right here for what's going around the top of the shoe, that we have access to put some supports onto it. This part right here is gonna be a little bit difficult because we can't really hit it. If we put enough of an angle on it, it might print itself without any supports. So we can kind of keep that in mind as we do it. These little guys right here, same thing. I'm just gonna quickly angle them in a way that's gonna make them really, really easy to support. Since this video isn't really about orientation, it's about the new features in Lychee Slicer, which is the grid support. So we'll get there really quick. All right, let's see this guy. Since this is the key right here, and this is the bottom, I want it to probably be where this is facing me more than this side, because this is the side we'll see. This is the side that will be kind of hidden. So I'll just make sure to angle it more like that. That way you don't see any of the support damage on the final product. All right, and then the last thing is the base. The bases are really easy. Generally just angle it which way. Since this is the front, I want the front to be angled up and the back to be angled down, just because, again, this leading edge is going to be damaged. There's really no way to prevent that, but it'll be behind the model, not in front when you're looking at it on your desk. So that way we keep that nice and perfect. And then the last thing is this. This is the same thing. We just want to know which way is the front. I believe this is the front of the model. And so, yeah, the back towards the back. All right, let's just turn this guy off. So now we've got our model ready to go. Next thing I want to do is I want to just lift everything off the build plate. And for that one, we can just go to lift up. And here I've preset this to be 5 millimeters at lift, which is also set right here. Now everything's 5 millimeters. I like to use 5. If it's a really big object, I'll use 6, but for the most part, I'm using 5. All right, the next thing before we can get into supporting is I like to see if any of this can be hollowed to save a little bit of resin. I can see that probably this would be good to be hollowed, and possibly this, and that's about it. So let's go over to hollowing, and I'm just gonna load 3D hollowing. I have a preset here that I like, which is 1.8 and 2 for the thickness of the wall and the quality of the 3D hollowing. So I'll apply that to both him and to the base. Now let's look at this base. I'm not quite sure if it's worth hollowing or not. To get a better idea of just how much I saved, I can come in here and I can do a suction cup detector. And it'll kind of give me a little bit of a visual estimate about how much I'm really hollowing out. And that's not a lot, but it's not zero either. So I'll probably come in here and just put in a couple holes. It's kind of hard to see with the suction cup running, so I'll put in the hole and then I'll run it again. And now from here I can use the exterior view to kind of get an idea of what's going on. Make sure I move these around so that they're kind of at the bottom of where the suction cup's going to go. And now I can just add in a few more holes. I can make this a little bit bigger. And I can hit Control C on my keyboard to copy that setting. So next time I place a hole, I can hit Control V, and now that's the hole size I'm using. So I can come in here and just make sure that I've got enough drainage for this as we print it. And that's probably about it for that one. I'll probably need put a hole right here at the top as well, just for a draining. Let's actually just put it right here. Make it a little bit bigger. Go to my 3D view, make sure it goes all the way through. It doesn't. We'll just push it all the way through then, until it hits that void. All right, it's kind of hard to see what's going on, but oh, that didn't work at all. It goes right in there. Maybe hollowing this isn't worth it. But we can come in here and put another hole right here and connect the two. And now I've got a little tunnel that I've made between this and this section right here. I can even drag this out a little bit. All right, so I've got some hollowing in there. Let's run another suction cup detector. We should have a lot less or a lot more. I think that one's not registering for some reason. All right, that's probably enough for that one. What we could do is go in here and add some blockers to some places. I'll show that real quick. Let's add a blocker into this area just because we don't want that to be hollowed right there. Update it. Now if I run another suction cup detector, this should be filled in a little bit more right here. To an extent, I think some of the suction cup is caused by the object. All right, so this one's much easier to hollow, probably more worth it than the other one. On this one, I'll just put one at the lowest point to prevent the suction cup. A couple more kind of around. Again, I'll Control C, Control V just to get that smaller size. And this one, maybe it's too close. Let's see. We'll use the 3D view, get in here and just adjust it real quick, just to make it a little bit easier to get closer to that bottom. I just need a hole closest to where that starts to print so that I don't have a suction cup at the very beginning. So if we run the suction cup detector on this one, we only have a tiny little bit, and that's inside the mouth, which we can put in a little drainage there and get rid of that. I can even put in a little bit of drainage on both of these right here. So when it's hanging upside down on the build plate after it's done printing, it'll some of the resin will leak out. But also as I'm cleaning it, some of the IPA is gonna flush that through and just kind of help flush this model out and make it a little bit easier to clean. Make sure both of those went all the way through. This one kind of didn't. I can just adjust that real quick like that. And we are good. All right, so this one's been hollowed and drained. This one I'm just gonna delete the hollowing on because I'm not gonna spend too much time on trying to fix all that complicated shape. All right, so now we can finally get into supporting with the new grid support system. Now that we're ready, we want to do the hollowing first because we wanted these holes in position before we started supporting, because we don't want to have to come back in and delete supports where we need the holes to go, which is why we do it in that order of orientation, hollowing, the drain holes, then supporting. So all right, now you'll find the new structure system under support. We'll prepare, support, and then structure. And what you'll do is it's individual basis. So you'll select an object and you'll turn it on under the grid mode. And what you'll see is these yellow pattern on the build plate. And this pattern indicates the how far apart the support structure can actually snap. So each one of those dots is a snap point for the grids. As we go up, those get further away. Of course, as we go down, they get closer. So play around with that and see how you like it, but I'll give you a quick example of what that kind of looks like after you've placed supports, because you can adjust that after placing them. So you kind of see that right here, what it's doing is snapping to the different grids. And if I move that down, let's say really small, you'll see this snaps a lot quicker. Of course, the further away they are, the more the apparent, and so the more resin savings, but it's a kind of a give and take, because if it's too far away, there's not gonna be enough structure in your supports. Too close and it's gonna not parent enough and you won't get quite the resin savings that you could get. So on this one, let's try 4 and let's go through and just place a couple supports. Now the next thing I could do is I could manually place these supports kind of like this, and you'll see they'll auto parent as I go around, saving quite a bit of time. And these are actually pretty structural. Let's also do this so we can see a little bit better. There we go. I don't have a bunch of stuff in the way. And it's just pretty easy to come here and do this. No more, have to go through and parent them yourself, or use an auto parenting tool. But the next thing that's kind of nice is that these also work with grid supports. So I can come over here to manual, the support projection, and I can select these two right here. And remember, I already have the hollowing holes here, so those are going to interact with this. I can then preview the supports. Let's turn on my infill, and let's just generate these supports. So in a few clicks now, I've now generated all the supports, both for the around the ring and on the base. Right here you can see some of these are overlapping the edge, and remember, this is a visible edge, so we don't want this, which is really easy to do. We can just come back in here, start support projection again, and I can go over to border and just kind of increase this offset, maybe by another 0.5 millimeter. Let's try just a little bit more. This just kind of just pushes this leading edge away from the edge of the selection. Let's try 30 and then preview. Still going a little bit, but it's better. I could go in here and manually just move them back, but that's not really what I want to do. I'd rather do this one more time and move this border by just a little bit more, just to get it further away. All right. So, and then now when this is here, I can actually go in here if I want to, go into structure and adjust these. And you'll see that the snap points will actually change based upon the interval. And so you'll see here it'll create more grids, or create more support shafts, and it gets less and less and less. Of course, if you go too high, you end up with maybe a little too much going on for the size of that particular model. So in this one, maybe 3 to 4, I would think is about a good balance. And then there's a whole new bracing system. The way this one works is with the model selected, you select which kind of preset you like, and then just click on add update, and it'll go through and add the updates of the bracings. There's quite a few options in here. Of course, which one you should use will vary depending on the height and the size of the model. I created this little one I called Ultra Resin Savings, which is very, very little bracing, and the bracing's a little bit smaller, but maybe on this model, this is a little bit better, as that will give it enough structure. Now, once we're done with the base, this was really easy because I had a flat base. Now I can still come in here, select what support type I want to use. I'm going to stick with the light on these arms. And just this overhang, what I would worry about right here is these kind of peel, where you'll see like this kind of like a little peeling effect as it goes up. I don't want that. I don't want damage, but there's really not much of a choice. So I'll use a really small support tip. I don't need anything big because this isn't to support this arm. This arm is going to mostly support itself off of the base. This is just to prevent any sort of layer peeling that I might get. I'll do the same on this end. I just want to make sure they're at the very bottom. And if I hold down shift, see it'll do this interval. So it kind of creates a line between them. And now if I just come in here and hit bracing, it'll update all the bracing and include those as well this time. So it's a really quick way to go through and add those in. And then last thing, let's get the back here. We've got a couple islands here. Same thing, I can just kind of manually place them in, and you'll see the auto parenting is going to automatically snap these together, saving me quite a bit of time. I don't have to go through and manually do that to save a bunch of the resin and support shafts. And same thing here on this guy. I just want to make sure there's enough so that it's going to print, and also so that it's stable. Right now I feel like there's enough so that it prints, but I'm not sure if it's stable, because if I bring this down right here until it connects to the model, which isn't going to happen until I'm about right here, all this is kind of free floating in the air right here, and maybe it's stable, but maybe it's not. So I just want to make sure I get a few on the back where I can't really see it when the model's together, to make sure that it's stable. And these are smaller support tips, so that they will leave damage, but I'd rather not have layer lines than have it unstable. And the thing I really like about grid support is that I don't feel as guilty about putting these support tips in, because unlike normal, if I turn off grid support right here, and let's just redo that to give you an example. Well, I guess what I can do is just select all these right here I just placed. If I want to snap them off the grid and go back to the traditional method, I can just right click and go make support vertical, and that's kind of the traditional method. And so you can see in here, as I'm adding more supports, I'm just adding in more and more support shafts, and you've probably seen where there's some models that are just really clumped together. You can't even see through the supports. You've got all these ones that overlap. And so obviously that's not something that I want to do. So I can turn snap to grid back on, right click, and then recalculate, and it will recalculate them with grid on, so they'll all snap back to the grid. And that's kind of something you can play around with. There are situations where it's better to not have snap grid supports on. So like for example, at the very beginning of a print where it's the hardest, because right here, there's nothing to really build on. All this is just floating in space, this part right here. And I like to make sure the beginning of the model prints really well and very stable, because any shifting of this can cause some layer lines or shifting across the entire print. So maybe on this one, I want the prints to be more, I do want them to be more vertical, and I'm okay with having, maybe even using a slightly larger support tip for some of this, for a few of the beginning ones. And then moving on to a smaller one as I kind of go up, as I've done some stability. And then after that one, it's okay to move, then to move to grid to save a little bit of resin. I may even come back in here and use like a really small one to kind of put in between a few of them, just to make sure that those first few layers, while this thing is building up and getting some thickness and some stability, they've got everything they want. So there's kind of an example of where like you still might want to combine grid and not grid. Both systems are still very valuable. And then the last thing would just be, run an island search. This will take just a moment on this model. It's not too complicated. Because it is hollow, we do want to make sure we don't miss out on hollowing as well on any of the keys that might be inside. So for this one, we can check the exterior and just have a look at it, just make sure. There's a few islands underneath, but nothing big. Nothing here I would really worry about with hollowing. I think it's going to be okay. But sometimes you might have a key up here. Maybe there's a hat that goes on and there's a key. If you don't support that key inside, it's going to flatten out and your hat won't fit. So it's an important step to always remember to check the inside and outside for islands or support when you're dealing with hollowed models. And that's it for that guy. That guy's pretty easy. Let's turn on the rest and see what's next. These shoes won't be bad at all. They'll be pretty easy. Oops, didn't mean to put a hole there. Though you could hollow out those shoes if we want to save a little resin. Usually for that one, what I would do is I would just take a hollow hole and just go all the way through the top. It's really easy to clean, save a little resin, then come in here and just add the hollowed out. We'll see how much we saved here. Not too much, just a little bit, but something's kind of fun to do sometimes. It doesn't hurt. I mean, the lighter the object is, and the less the cross section, the better it's going to print. So instead of this being a solid white cross section, you now have a little bit less. But yeah, something to think about. And then on this one, since it's so small, we can manually do it, or we could just go back to using the grid support system, which is we go to structure, turn it on. Since this is small, I'm going to change the snap a little bit smaller, about 3 millimeters. Go down to the manual and then just select this and then just hit go. It's 16 supports, didn't save me too much time, but basically I'm done with this shoe. I can come back over to structure and hit the bracing to see, oh yeah, looks like I added a little bit of bracing. Not much, we don't need much for this one, it's pretty short, but it's one way to get these things just move, get done really quick. If I want to do this one more traditional, looks like we got some interesting geometry there on that shoe. It's same thing I want to put on the snap, turn on snap to grid. Let's go back down to 3 just because this shoe is really small. And I'll just go through and manually place these in. I probably want a couple on the back of the heel here just to get a little bit more support. And then I can just kind of go around. I like to go around the shoe just to make sure I don't have any issues, especially this is a leading edge right here. I want to make sure that edge is supported, and then something like that. Last thing I have to do is make sure that this is supported. I'll use a really small one on this one actually. There's not a lot of weight here. And again, I'm less worried about putting more support tips on with grid because they just kind of snap together and auto parent. So it's really mostly just adding tips. A few places you're adding pillars, but for the most part, just adding some support tips. Hit auto, only added a few. Actually, hold on. There we go. I added a few more. This is gonna be very structurally sound. It's gonna be pretty easy. I remembered on this one I forgot to add supports here on the back. I don't want to forget that. So we'll make sure we got those on there. Just enough. I don't think we need any there. That's not really an island. But going across here, I want to make sure we've got enough. Out here, I don't think we need any. I think that's going to print just fine. Adding supports here, I think I'll just damage the front and I'll damage the front of the shoe. You could maybe reach in here like this and add a few if I'm worried about it, just until they snap off like that. That one's a little bit close. There we go, something like that. And then add my support bracing. And real quick, let me just check the chat real quick. See if we have any questions. What's the smallest hole size you use? You usually limit to 2 millimeters. And does the support grid only affect the base of the support? Yeah, so the grid only does affect the base of the support. It's kind of how they're all going to parent to snap together. And for the hole size I use, 2 millimeters is preferred. You definitely want it to be big enough to actually drain. So for the bottom is more important than the top, because the bottom of where you're placing a hole in the bottom, right here, this is where it's preventing suction cups. And when a suction cup, it needs to allow enough resin and air to flow through while that's being pulled off the build plate to fill the void. So if let's go back over to this big guy right here, and let's do do the exterior view. So everything you see here, this is the void. If the holes are too small, all this void can't be filled up with air and resin as it pulls up and down off the build plate. And that's where you're gonna, even if you have a hollowing hole, you'll still have a suction cup, especially if you're lifting off the build plate really fast. And so that's where it's more important to have a larger one. Now at the top, this is mostly used for drainage, these ones at the top. If it's too small, it's not gonna drain as well. You're gonna have some resin trapped inside when you go to clean it. But the IPA or whatever you're using, the solvent to clean it, is going to flow much better than the resin. And so just having those holes at the bottom, and if you're dunking it in and out of the IPA, it's gonna be able to flush through and drain all the way through, and it's gonna clean it just fine. So I would say on the top, yeah, I'd probably try to keep it above 1 millimeters, but not as important as the bottom. The bottom I'm aiming for 2, 4, or 6 millimeters, depending on the size of the void that's in there, just to make sure you don't get stuck with suction cups. Let me see if that's... And then how does the grid supports affect mini supports like fans? The grid support doesn't affect mini supports. I'll kind of show you on that one real quick what that looks like. So right here is a good example of where we might want a mini support. Let's grab a medium and just kind of place up that right there. Same thing maybe on this line. I want to make sure we've got enough. But as we get taller, we don't want to keep doing that. It might be good to put in something like a fan between here and here. So let's delete that. And with grid support on, right here, and let's recalculate this. So now we've snapped it all to the grid. We can come back over here and create a fan. And the thing of the fan is it's just going to be like a normal fan like you're used to, where it doesn't affect it. One thing that could affect it that I've noticed is that let's do this again with grid support off. And let's create a fan. And I'll create a proper fan this time where the base is bigger than the tip, because that's how I think they should probably be for some added stability. Like that. So if this is here and I enable grid support, and then I snap this to the recalculate it, it's going to affect the way that the fan goes because the fans are attached to the shaft. So something just to keep in mind if you want to convert something over from a non-grid support to a grid support to save resin. I would probably avoid selecting supports. And again, to do that, you just select them, right click, and then go to recalculate it, and they'll snap to the grid. I would just avoid selecting any supports that have a bunch of minis attached to them, and select all the other ones that don't. And even though this won't be snapped to the grid, you're still going to get all the benefits and the resin savings of all the ones around it being snapped to the grid. So just kind of something to keep in mind with that. That was a good question. And for small things like this guy, where you're down low, this is probably where I wouldn't snap it to the grid at first, but as I go up and I place these ones, I would go here, turn it back on, maybe move that down because this is a small sword, and then I can come in here and not have to worry about, these support shafts all over the place as they automatically snap to each other and auto parent. Just something like this one. I mean, this is even another good, these don't even need to be medium. Let's go to medium light and then make these ones light because they're really small. And then I can even come in here and do some, some minis in here like this, just to give this guy as much chance as he can to print as flat as he can, because I don't want the bottom of that to have a bunch of droops or peeled layers. I think that's why I'm more afraid of is flat things like this, is layer peeling. And then update the bracing, and that guy's good to go. to do the rest of this model is going to be pretty dang quick. But let's move to something a little bit bigger, a little bit more interesting, like the waist. We'll hide this one. So the waist is going to be probably the more complicated one, just because there's all that. Let's hide these and move this center. I like working this way, just because of all the cloth and stuff like that. But it's going to be a lot of the same thing. Well, actually, first thing, this probably could be hollowed as well. Let's do that real quick. Won't take long. Once you get used to how to use Lychee, you can move through these things really, really quick. So I'll put a nice hole right there, maybe a couple where the body's gonna interact with. These hollowing holes should interact with the object as a whole that's on it. And then right here, I'll just put a couple in the base of these feet. If it's red like this means that there's something going on with it. It's going through too much geometry, so it's kind of a good indication that maybe that one needs a little bit of work in order to function. Red also means that you can't export it like that. Exporting means converting this object into a STL with the hollowing a part of that file. But if it's red and you slice it, it will still slice correctly. What's marked as red will still be a hole in the slice object. It just, again, won't convert as a STL. All right, we've got a little bit of a suction cup down here. We can put like a small one. And if I want to make sure this isn't a problem, what I can do is I can do cap only, and it will create this right here into a cap right here that I can later on use to plug out that hole. Just kind of glue it in there. So yeah, and there shouldn't be any suction. If there's suction cups, they should be pretty small. We'll do a quick check. And nope, we're good. One more check to make sure. Yep, no suction cups, we're good. All right, so now let's go back to supporting. It's gonna be the same thing. We wanna turn on grid support. This time I'm gonna leave it on 5. It's a slightly bigger model. And because this is such a unique shape, I'm not gonna use the projection support. I'm gonna go through and do this manually. There's a couple ways to do this. If you've been doing it for a while, it's kind of easy. Like for me, I can just see the white, and I'm just going to go to where the white, kind of leads to the bottom layer. And the white is a good indication. If it comes to like a dot, let's see here, you'll kind of see it comes to like a dot right there. That's an island right there. And so it's after a while you can kind of start to see these. But if you're still getting used to it and you haven't done a lot of supporting, the layer slider is really good for this one because you can just kind of go through and see. Oh, look, here's that first layer of this object. I can see what it looks like. And if you put like, let's say 1 here, there's a good chance this isn't gonna print. You really wanna have more than this, because yeah, this part will print, but as it gets further and further away, you're gonna start having some layer lines or some failures. And as this thing gets bigger and bigger and bigger, this is now like a wing. And as this thing is going down into the resin's gonna push down on this wing and actually make that whole thing kind of tilt. And that's where you're gonna get some more layer lines and failures as well. So we really wanna make sure we have enough supports, not just to get this thing to start printing being these very first few layers, but enough support so that it doesn't flop around and shift during the print, causing layer lines, and it could just be a complete failure. So I'm gonna come in here and I'm just gonna add in enough to start getting the model to print. And for something that's like this face resounding, I always like to do 3. 1 on the bottom and then a couple more. And then as it goes up and it goes bigger, I'll just kind of add a few more. The more steep the angle, or I guess the more shallow the angle, the less you need. But you're still going to need some for stability reasons, even if you don't think you need them for getting those first layers to print reasons. So let's kind of go through on this one. As you can see, the grid supports, it's just snapping to it. Like I don't have a whole bunch of resin used. It's awesome. I don't have to worry about parenting. It's already done. You can come back here and adjust things if you want. Like let's say I don't really like how this thing is. I can kind of go in here and you can move it and you can kind of see how it's going to snap to the different grids. So now I'll snap to that one. Or you can still, everything you've always done. I can hold down Alt on my keyboard and auto parent it. Or you can always just right click on it and say make support vertical, and it will snap off the grid and go back to more just looking for the path based on some of your settings. So you can still have all the same tools you've had before, but now you just have a few more options. All right, and again, also like I said before, I can come in here and I can snap these down to 4, if I'm not entirely happy with how they're snapping and the distance. You can see the difference between 4 and 5 millimeter snapping. Oops. If I select it first, it helps. There we go. So you can see with 5, it's less support usage, but maybe some of the distance are a little further than you like. So it's all just kind of up to preference. And you see it doesn't change the tips either. All the tips stay unaltered. So it's actually how you can take a model that's been pre-supported by someone else and alter it this way without affecting where they placed all the tips, which is the most important thing, because that's what changes everything, is the angle which they come off and where they're placed. And so on this one, what I've done at this point is I've added enough supports to keep this thing, I think will print, but I don't think I've added enough for stability. And this is where it can be important to kind of look back up and say, okay, which is the front? This is the front of the model. And if I put supports here, I might see them, but the way the model sits is he's actually kind of laying a little bit on his stomach. So I'm really not going to see these. So I can get away with putting some supports here, but I can really also get away with putting some kind of up here, and they'll be hidden underneath the model and you'll never see them. But they're going to add some stability. So that way I don't get layer lines will show through regardless. So, but those support tips are going to be really, really hard to see. And we'll just kind of go through and keep adding them. I can go down to like an ultralight now because there's really not much weight I'm holding here. I'm just trying to get so these things actually print. And then just kind of keep doing that, going around the, I'm actually going to go light. Go around the edges here, and I can look for these circles, or I can keep using the layer slider and, you know, slowly work my way up, you know, by placing them on these islands. There we go. And I probably want one more there. Slowly grow it, add a few more support tips, slowly grow it, add a few more. And I'm just adding a few more just because I don't want there to be a big gap. Right here, there's a pretty big gap between those two. So let's put one there, one there, one there. And right here, I've got this is growing kind of big. Let's put one right there, just give it some stability. And some of this is trial and error. What I might do is go through and like print one of these and then like support it, print it, look at it and see, okay, I probably didn't need a support here, or I needed one here, and then adjust it and then print it again. For me, that's common. I know there's probably some people who are much more confident, much better than I am, and they don't have to do that step, but for me, I like doing that. I generally print everything twice. Yeah, basically you don't need to do Alt to place supports, but even more than that, not having to hold down Alt. Sorry, that was a question. So basically you don't need to press Alt to do parenting anymore, because before we had to do this manually. You'd hold down Alt, click, and then click, and that's how you would parent. And you'd have to manually do it for every single one. So it was double the clicks. And also, once it was done, it was pretty static. Not only do I not have to make 2 clicks anymore, it's not static, meaning I can change this and adjust it on the fly. So it's pretty powerful when using, especially if you're putting something big and you really want to balance how much resin usage versus the structure. It can be pretty powerful to be able to just quickly just alter it on the fly like that. Especially if like it prints and it fails and you're like, oh, it failed because I didn't have enough structure here. You go in and you just adjust it, print again. You don't have to go through and re-support it or really go through all the work to figure out, you know, okay, how do I go through and unparent this, reparent this, which is what you used to have to do. Extra work for sure. And here on the bottom, I'll just do the same thing. I like to go kind of around the hollowing hole because the hole is a cliff. Anywhere you've got a cliff, you know, like this right here, this is a cliff, meaning I've got, if I place the support here, this resin's supported, but this resin isn't. So I want to make sure I've got enough supports on the cliffs so that way you don't get warping or layer lines. And then, well, let's just scroll this down and just kind of grow it out like this. See right here? We want to make sure we don't miss this. Scroll up a little bit and just kind of keep going. Right here, now this is the overhang. Overhangs I see forgotten about more than anything. I'm not sure why, but I think everyone focuses on islands maybe a little bit too much and not quite enough on overhangs. But islands are a great place to place a support to get the print started. An overhang is what you need to support if you want that thing to finish. And a big overhang like this one is a big flat object. So even though I don't really want to place a bunch of supports on this, because everywhere I place one there'll be a little bit of damage, not doing so is going to possibly cause this to fail flatten or have layer lines. And so what I really want to do is just kind of like, I like to do it in, because this is done in like a map where each layer line grows it out, you know, like if you look like a 3D map, I follow the same pattern. So I'll kind of go out to where I say, okay, this is a pretty big wing right here. That's a pretty big wing. I don't really trust that this would peel off from the FEP. I kind of worried it would rip right here, this next layer. So I just want to give it something to build off of. So this is where I'll kind of go around that, you know, that layer right there and just support it. And then I'll go up again until I see maybe about the same distance between here, you know, between this and this, but also depends on the angle. As you go up, the angle gets more and more, goes up more and more and more. And so I don't need as many. So I do want to put the supports before I think I need them, not after I think I need them, because that's not very helpful. So I'll go through again and just put another ring around it. And yeah, this will add some support damage, but it's really better than what could happen, which is failure. All right. I've done most of the bottom. Of course, I missed a bunch of stuff around the outside, but now to help me out, because I don't want to have to keep going through and finding them all manually, let's just run an island search. And this is pretty cool. So structure's on, island search is ran. I've got 36 islands that are found, and they're all mostly up above. There's a few on the bottom, but mostly they're up on these little tiny skirts. So what I can do is, you know, select maybe my light or my ultralight, which is 2. But on this one, I'm going to do about the mix. I'm at 2.4, about in between, and I'm going to click on support all islands. Now this is going to use the grid system. They're all going to snap to the grid, but it's also only going to place supports on the islands that were just discovered, which is going to help me out a lot. I can go in here and do a little cleanup on where I don't want them. I'm not happy with the way it went, and just kind of do some manual work here to clean it up. But for the most part, a lot of the work is done for me. You know, if I wanted to, I could try to do the same thing I just did and convert these minis to full support if I don't want to have, you know, mini supports on it. Sometimes there's nothing you can do, like this one right here. I think I'm going to have to put a mini, or I let it flatten out, but I can hide a mini kind of up here a little bit. At some point, there is also the decision you have to make of, is it worth putting a support, or is it worth letting it flatten out a little bit? And this one, I don't know. I think it's going to be worth putting a support on it, but let's find out. And the way I like to find out is I'll just look at the island, see how big it is, and see what would flatten out. So if I didn't support this island, I would imagine this part right here would be flat. So by the time it got to about right here, and maybe even flat out even more, it really would flatten out quite a bit. So this doesn't attach to the model for a long time, so this definitely has to be supported, but I can actually come in here and support it underneath, behind it. So you can't see it. One way to do that is actually to look at it from behind and just sneak a support right back there. I'll sneak a couple of them in there. And that's going to decrease the size of that island without you ever even noticing it. Now if I don't support this, it'll pretty much flatten out to, you know, where I start getting those in there, which is about right here. Still a little bit too much, so I can try to do something like that one, where I can get enough, just a little extra support on that guy, and then maybe even a little mini off that. This doesn't need much. This is really small. We're zoomed in, so it looks big, but in reality, what we were just looking at is tiny. It would be really hard to see it. So keep that in mind as well. And we just kind of keep going around, looking for more of those where I can, you know, convert these. I can even, if I just like this one, I can right-click on it and go make support pillar, which will shove it through the entire model, and then you can just drag it out like that. That's one way to do it. Or with the grid support system, you know, you can just find out the point where it snaps, and then you can come in here and you can adjust the tip just by moving it to where it's at the very bottom. And now I've got a nice little structure there. We'll do the same thing here. This one's a little bit bigger, so let's do 2 on that one. Same with this guy's a little bit bigger. I'll add a little more, because one thing we did was we just supported the islands, but what we didn't do was support the overhangs. So I still got to go through and kind of fill it in, just to make sure that prints properly. But it definitely helped me locate all the islands. And there's a lot of islands here that I, you know, especially the bottom, that I don't have to worry about. I'm not going to touch them up. The system automatically did it for me in a way where I don't have to go back and spend time on it. And let's see here. That's probably a few more over here, just to make sure. And I think we're good. Now the last step is to make this thing look, as you can see, it's just, I think it's beautiful. I've got the thicker supports at the bottom. And the way I do my supports is the bigger the tip, the bigger the base, just so you can visualize. I've got bigger supports at the bottom as I go out towards the outside, and some of these smaller things, I get a little bit smaller. But right now, if I printed this, I think it would fail because these small support tips would just kind of fall over. But that's where the bracing is still good. So let's try tall object bracing. So oops, this helps if I select the whole model first. And that's what this looks like. Now that is a lot of bracing. This would be very, very strong. We probably don't need anything quite like that one. You know, strong is even stronger. Like if you're printing something big and heavy, let's say you're doing a mold, I would recommend using this type of bracing. Usually if you're doing a mold, it's expensive resin, and the failure of the mold is a lot worse than anything. But for something like this, where it's just a mini, the default is probably the one that you're gonna use the most. Or like I said, I created my own, which I called my ultra resin saving, which is just a little bit smaller, a little bit less. And then last thing, let's get a raft on this guy because I like the way rafts look. And so that is pretty much done, except for one thing. We got to do the interior. So you see right here, this placed one little island there because the island search that I did, that's not enough. Let's go through and let's do what I like to call an interior pillar, which for me is just the 1.5, 1.5, meaning the tip diameter and the diameter of the shaft is the same. I do this because these will never come off. This is going to stay inside the model forever, and I want it to be big and strong, and I don't ever want it to break free, and that's going to keep that key from moving. And if I do this, you'll see what those look like. That way, there's just a lot of strength right here on this key, because I don't want that key to flatten out, because if it flattens out, I'm not going to be able to get the body on it. It won't fit. So this time we could probably call this guy done. Now what I did for that one, if I did it too fast, sorry, is I went over to the layer preview, and you hover over it, and you can change this toggle from up to down, and this is going to change the clipping. So on this one, it's going to clip from top to bottom. On the other one, it's going to clip on the opposite way. So that way you can kind of see inside the model, or you can look, you know, inside the model from the top down. So something to kind of, a nice fun little tool to use. I like using it a lot, especially for 3D hollowed prints to kind of go through and do the internal supports. All right, real quick, just want to make sure there's any questions so far. Any more questions for anybody? Because we're about reaching the end of this live stream. We started a little bit late, so it's okay to go a little bit over. And I know I'm going pretty quick. Mostly there's a lot of support on this build plate. All right, if we don't have any questions, let me just do this base real quick, or these two real quick, because they're gonna be fast. Let's delete that guy. What's nice about this one is kind of the same as everything. We turn on grid supports. Actually, I could just select them both and turn on grid supports for both of them. Manual, go to support projection. Let's grab those and let's do it. And we're done. And this guy, start support projection. And we're done. Now let's just grab them both. We will do our structure, add bracings, and they're all braced. Add a raft. I do like rafts. And voila. Okay, so those two are done. And they're gonna print really, really well. So it's really fast. If you've never supported before and you've got something with a flat base, follow that workflow, and that's gonna get you really, really close. Even if it's something with some more detail on it, do that on the lower layers, then just go through, find the islands and place the islands on the upper layers, run the bracing, and you're pretty much good to go. There's a lot of skill set I think you used to have to do your own manual supports that you just don't really have to have anymore. Is there a hotkey for flipping the camera direction? That's a good question. I don't actually think that there is. That would be a nice one. I can look into that one. And if not, I can put it in as a good suggestion, because I do actually use this quite a bit. It'd be funny. I've actually never looked for a hotkey for it. Let me arrange it. I did forget I moved this guy, but that's okay. I can move him right back to where he used to be. And again, if I didn't explain this well enough, this one right here, it's kind of this black color. What it means is wherever this guy intersects will not print. So right here, when this prints, it'll be missing this black area, which is just enough for this guy to slot in here and kind of cover up what I think is going to be some damage to that belly. So if you missed the beginning of it, that's where that is. And where this is right here is just object is a whole. It converts it from being this object, and we'll turn it on, to this kind of black object. And like I said, whatever intersects will not print. This, you can't export it this way, but you can slice it and print it this way. All right, if there's any more questions, I'll answer those before we end the live stream. If not, I think I've covered about as much as I have time for today. And the questions we're placing into the chat for vocal, which is the channel just above the general. Thank you, Harper. Give it maybe one more minute in case anyone else has anything, and if not, then we'll call it and let you all have a rest of your evening back. Got a few more people chatting, so we'll give them a break. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, happy printing, everybody. If you use this, I really do want to see what you've printed. I want to see how you've done the supports. I want to see what you've learned. It's a new feature for everybody, including me. So if there's some more to learn and some things to discover in this. So definitely play around with it. Discover some tricks and some tips that you like in using this feature, and make sure to post them. I love to see it. We love to see it, especially feedback, how to improve these features and all other features. So yeah, make sure to post your prints or even some of your settings, especially in the, if we go to here in the, structure. If you go in here and you click on this gear, you can actually manually, there's a lot of settings in here to edit. There's a lot that you can do with these bracings. So play around with those as well and find like a setting that you really like. Because once you save it, it's there forever, and you can share those with everybody, and we can all kind of, gain from everyone else. All right, and with that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.